these are the kind of sacrifices that I'm going to have to make. That's like my 5-second insufficient summary. But I can see the vault. I've penetrated the security of the bank. I owe it to this book to write it. We're back for another week of writing. If it's your first time here, I'm Asa. I am the author of 6 Sermons, the Audible series starring Stephanie Shu from Everything Everywhere All at Once. And here is the agenda for this week. I am so excited. At the top is Bully. Bully is the psychological horror thriller that I'm working on. You'll notice this 2HX. What that stands for is 2 hours a day. That's the goal. This is the big project. This deserves the time. Next, a lot of feedback giving this week. I go to a writing group here in Mexico City. I need to read their stuff. Andres is a colleague in LA, a screenwriter. I need to read his script. I have a call with Amiyali. This I'm stoked about, and this I cannot wait to find out what is said because I think it's going to be cool stuff to share with you. So Amiyali is a horror writer, and she gave a masterclass to the upcoming writers of Diario de Terror, which is the horror fiction collective that I run here in Mexico City. And during this masterclass, she talked about the relationship between horror writing and intersectionality. And I was like, that's interesting. We'll report back on that. After that, I need to send a short film that I've been working on the last couple of vlogs to Elias, who's a friend, a former professor of mine. Hopefully we can move to production this year. It's just a little 5-minute silent operation. I think it's doable. There's a few other odds and ends. And then at the bottom here is a little personal note. It says, eye on the prize, the art, Asa. The point there is to remind myself that while I have myriad responsibilities this week, goals, the main thing is this. So this story is about hearing loss. I'm deaf in one ear. It is going to be a really excellent thriller if I put in the time. But it means that I really have to put in the time, and I've got to prioritize it. And I just think it's really easy to get sidelined by other stuff. So that's a little reminder to myself to, focus on what matters. Anyway, the first thing I'm going to do this morning is take care of this. This will just be half an hour. So I've got to make a couple short changes to the short film and then send that off to Elias. After that, I'm going to go to a cafe to put in some time on Bully. So glad you're here. It's going to be a great week. You want to say hi, Hugo? That's Hugo. So I sent off the short film script to Elias, and as I was doing that, I just had a little thought. Something I wish I had known earlier in my career is that there is such a specific etiquette for asking someone to give notes on your piece. And I think the most important thing is to always ask if someone is available to give notes before sending them something to read with the expectation that they will be available. I would include folks who will say yes, folks who will always read your work, etc., because it just means you're treating them like a professional, which is something in addition to who they are as your friend. And I really believe in that. Okay, so that was great. I started out by reading a short story by Samantha Schweblin, the Argentine writer who writes kind of horror, kind of uncanny, kind of weird fiction. I absolutely love her work. And I was reading her because she is a good comp for me in terms of the kind of fear that I'm trying to generate in my stories. So she really works in the minuscule. She finds ways to make the smallest things so scary. For example, in the title story, A Mouthful of Birds, the object of horror that drives the whole story is a bird cage. It's just a simple, small bird cage, small finches. And you contrast that with other types of horror projects, say The Substance, where people's entire bodies get grotesque. And it's like a radically different kind of fear. In one of my earlier vlogs, I had this conversation around the value of having different kinds of comps for your book, which is something I'm kind of just learning right now. You know, I'm finding it super valuable to have books, to read books that are paced the way I want my book to be paced, that have prose the way that I want my book to have prose. And now that we're talking about the horror element, I want to be reading books that scare me the way that I want to scare you. I also continued to find traction by conceiving of the story as the demons. It's like a ghost, demon, whatever you want to call it. There's a malevolent force. It's a haunter and a haunted in this story. And you know, you think of a story like that, and it's like the one being haunted, trying to free themselves from the possession, is who you think of as the protagonist. Come on, Hugo. Come on. But actually, if you give agency to the haunter, it really helps move the story forward. And so I've been in this place where I'm like, oh no, what happens next? I'm kind of spinning my wheels. I'm writing some scene that's interesting and cool, but it's not really moving the story forward. What do I do? And it's like, okay, what would the demon do right now? What does it want? And what would it do to get what it wants right now? And because they have a very clear, concrete objective, possess, then, you know, it's easy to figure out what happens next. And it's solving the writer's block problem. You know, so anyway, that's where things are at. Really great start to the week. It's mid-morning. It's been a highly successful morning of writing. I have broken full on the resolution I made last week about only writing by hand, only pure drafting. Actually, before discovering authortube and all its glory as primarily a script writer, I was unfamiliar with these terms, plotter, pantser, discovery writer. They still sound a little silly in my ear, to be honest. But I am coming to appreciate these distinctions in terms of figuring out my own process. And in fact, I am more of a plotter than a discovery writer or pantser. Principally, I'm finding the central beats of my story, some kind of roadmap that gives me an idea of what's coming next, at least 30 pages from now, or something like that. So what I did is I took the story that I have and applied one of my favorite structure systems called the nutshell technique. There's a book by Jill Chamberlain is her name, by that title, that describes this. And between realizing that if I make my protagonist the sort of ghost demon of this book, by doing that, all of a sudden I can kind of slot this story into some known beats, a known sort of sense of momentum, which for the time being, I'm finding really useful. I will make clear that all of these kind of systems of analysis, these screenwriting books, Save the Cat for Novels, all of which they're formulas, right? They are formulas. You can't really apply them to everything all the time, and the more ambitious the project, the farther often, at least, it will go away from these formulaic models. But I think for myself, at least, they give me a place to start, they give me a place to go, they give me something to hold on to in which the real artistry, elegance, deviation from structure, grand artistic creative moments, which maybe are brewing at the moment, can then kind of be applied. And I have to admit, I feel much more secure in the story right now. I feel like I do have a roadmap. I feel like Google Maps is working again, and it's like, you know what? It's a long way you have to go before you finish this book, but just follow the line, and you'll get there. And ultimately, I'll probably end up, in Omaha versus Chicago, LA to Chicago. If you've watched my other videos, that's the road trip we're taking here with Bully. If I end up in Omaha, then, I've got to backtrack and get back on the other interstate. That's going to happen, I anticipate. but I feel a little more secure again. It is 11:25, and this afternoon I have that call about intersectionality and horror, which I'm really excited about, as you know. And then tonight, the writing group. So my afternoon, I'm going to spend reading all of those submissions for that group. So I have smart things to say, useful things to say tonight. I'll let you in a little bit on my notes process. And somewhere in there, we're probably going to get ceviche. So when I knew that I was going to read some work today and give feedback on it, I thought that would be an opportunity to talk about how I give feedback, thoughtful criticism, how to be constructive, all that good stuff. But it turns out that this moment is going to be something entirely different. I have to admit that I don't think I'm going to continue with this writing group based on a piece I just read. It bothered me. There were some things about it, and I had a positive experience the first time I went to this writing group, but I think I'm at this point where it's like, you know what? I need to be inspired. I need to be working with folks that are going to push me as an artist, and this is not what I need. And so I canceled, and I feel bad about that because time was spent reading my short film that I submitted. Fortunately, that was only like a page long. But anyway, I think sometimes you've got to protect your artistic self and be very selective about with whom you work, with whom you share your work, and above all, where you give your time. I think I would have received some great feedback tonight, and I think I would have added value to the other writers who were there. But as my partner says sometimes, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. And this is where I'm at. As this video started, I told you about this book that I have to write, that I owe it to this book to write it. And these are the kind of sacrifices that I'm going to have to make. So it's unfortunate that I won't be going tonight. You're going to miss out on this very charming cafe. But I think it's the right thing. In 7 minutes, I have my call with Amayali. This one outside. Okay, so I'm going to spare you a college lecture on intersectionality. If you don't know, intersectionality is looking at the various elements of one's identity, gender, sexuality, race, financial demographic, all the parts of us that determine who we are, seeing how those intersect and seeing how that intersection leads to various elements of privilege and discrimination. That's what intersectionality is. Now, what does it have to do with horror writing? Well, that was like a 30-minute call that effectively just led to a dozen recommendations about what that might mean. But I think the quick little hit here that I can give you is that no matter where you are in that orientation of things, there are specific things that are other, and that the source of all horror is other, the unknown. Lovecraft has a quote about this: the most scary thing is the fear of the unknown. King, the scariest thing is what's behind the door. And wherever you are in this sort of vector, this matrix, there are things that are other and unknowable to you that are therefore scary. In Bully, my particular piece, what is unknowable to the character who is deaf or losing their hearing is what they cannot hear, and they don't know where sound is coming from, and that is very scary. What you don't understand gives fear, and that is the source of terror in art. That's like my 5-second insufficient summary of what I just learned. I think a larger point here is that our job is to learn, be learning at all times, because how else are we going to write? Before writing in earnest this morning, I wanted to speak briefly about translation, the mysteries, the magic, everything that goes into it. This feels like a world of alchemy to me. not being fully fluent in any foreign language, intermediate fluent in several. Translation, reading literature in translation remains this grail, this unlocked, this locked vault. But I can see the vault. I've penetrated the security of the bank. I've made it to the back, and I'm staring at this massive vault, but without the code to get in. What's making me think of this is I continue to read Samantha Schweblin, the Argentine writer that I was reading yesterday. She continues to blow me away. I've read the rest of her books. This is the last one that I've read. Her last one I haven't read. I vowed to myself to force myself to read this final book in Spanish, but I was so eager to read her that I did not. And I am so excited to get to the point in my Spanish where I can read this book in Spanish, which I can now, frankly. I just have to have the patience to do so. And that's partly why I started Diario de Terror, is to immerse myself in the written word in Spanish. This conversation around Samantha Schweblin makes me think of a really formative moment that I had years ago when I was living in Paris. I went to Shakespeare & Co. The translators, Richard Piver and Larissa Volokonsky, not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. These two translators are iconic. They have translated much of the Russian literature canon. And I remember very vividly how there was someone in the audience, there was a Q&A afterwards. And this young person, this young man who was a student, a really sharp, kind of literary person. He identified himself as a PhD student at Princeton. And he asked them this question after they read from Gogol. This is the copy I bought when I was there. He said, hey, you know what? He's like, how do you do it? Because I think that your translations are better than the original. And, what is that like? How do you imbue these works with additional meaning that isn't in the original? And because he had also read the Russian literature works in Russian as well, and sort of had this foundation for comparison. And Richard Piver, one of these two translators, he sat stunned for a little while and looked at this guy with not quite disdain, but something in the direction, just a little tinge of kind of, how dare you? And he proceeded to say that question in and of itself was preposterous, that to suggest that a translation is not a reduction of the original piece, is not a compromise, a sacrifice from what is the piece. He spoke so convincingly and almost severely about this point with such conviction, and that moment remains with me. And I hold that moment as I work my way through canon, as it were, of Samantha Schweblin, because I know that I'm missing stuff, and I don't know what I'm missing. It's like that line from that movie, The Motorcycle Diaries, with Gabriel Garcia Bernal. He says, if I get it right, I have nostalgia for things I've never known, and I feel loss for things that I don't know that I've lost. Let me know what you think about translation specifically, for sure. If you are a bilingual writer-reader of Spanish, I am so curious if you have any insight on how Samantha Schweblin or the other Andean Gothic writers feel in Spanish. That was a lot, but I care about this. Let me know.
Trees aren't green, the ocean is gray, sky is a vague blue, come my way. My room is a mess, it could use a hand. My favorite TV shows are capturing. I know must get it right, must get back in the fight. This can't be a surprise, I think I let it slide. I'm sleepwalking through all of my...
It's Friday morning, and we have a lot to do because yesterday wasn't much of a day. As I talk about on this channel, it's this like ongoing balance between like focus, drive, commitment, and patience with yourself and rest and all that, you know. But we have one day left this week, and let's see what we can get out of it. I just took care of the email to my management company. They're in LA and New York, and they have one person here in Mexico City. However, that person has decided to retire, and that person is my rep, and so I have to find a new one. So what that means, the first thing I'm going to try to do is to see if there's someone else in the agency who might be a good fit to work with me, someone who digs me, digs my work, someone who will go to bat for me, to advocate for me. These are all things you want in a literary agent or a manager or an agent, you know, any kind of representation, even a lawyer. I love my lawyer. She's a huge part of my life as a professional writer, and she believes in me. And I can't emphasize enough how much having that kind of someone like that at your back is so important. You know, a bad lawyer is better than a no lawyer. I mean, don't quote me on that. Having any legal representation is so important to a contract. But I mean, gosh, when there's one who really believes in what you're doing as an artist, it's amazing. And my manager, who's retiring, he has done that for me too. And so now I'm in this phase where I've got to find another one. And it's exciting, though, because up until this point in my career, I have mostly been working in scripted areas, kind of TV, screenplays, theater, and now I'm working more in this sort of literary space. You know, this Project Bully I'm imagining as a book, an audio book, and of course there's so much crossover. But the timing here is not the worst in the world because, you know, maybe it's time to kind of find representation that has more connects and more sort of reach in that world. Anyway, this is just kind of like a day in the life thing. What I just did this morning is I sent this email to the management company and said, hey, like, let's talk. You know, I'd love to connect about next steps since retiring. So anyway, this is all part of it, right? There's so many little emails and so many things that we have to do to advocate for ourselves to get paid. As an additional way to procrastinate right now this morning, I'm going to reply to Elias's notes that he sent me. He sent me several voice memos about the short film script. If you're just jumping in, I'm working on a short film here, something quick, targeted, 5 minutes long, trying to get a little festival push here. You're getting to the kind of career-focused part of the week. And one thing you can do to get your name out there quickly, relatively easily, is through short films. My partner, other film people in my life have told me, you know what, this is like a waste of time. Even my manager himself, speaking of managers, he's like, look, could this be a feature? If not, I don't know if it's worth your time. For me, this particular project is not just a professional move. It's like a way that I can build community and work with a director that I like here a lot. It's also really simple. I want a reason to go to Guadalajara or Madrid. You know, that would be fun. That'd be fun. We can all go. We can all go together. Anyway, so I'm going to send him a little voice memo replying to his notes because I want to see what he thinks of one possible solution to the plan, the sort of problem with the script, or not problem, the sort of consistent question that keeps coming to mind, both to Roberto, the director, as well as Elias, this professor who gave notes on it. Is there clear enough kind of emotional buy-in at the beginning of the film, reason for us to care about this character, the main character? The TLDR on the story is it's basically someone comes home drunk, they're sad, and some weird things happen in their apartment. Nothing quite horrific, but very uncanny and strange, and it leads them to weep because of a certain grief that they feel, right? And so the question is, what is that grief? How do we make that grief explicit? Hola, Elias, ¿qué tal? Buenos días. Estoy pensando un poco más de tus comentarios. This is a perfect example of where I don't think I always use my energy wisely. In fact, I know that I don't always use my energy wisely. So, I mean, today's been like a really productive day. It's like, okay, hey, did some cleaning, did some reading, dealt with those film notes, but I haven't worked on Bully at all. And there's this tension between, that's what I wanted to be doing this week. That's the main thing. And the fact that I haven't done that. And that gap is creating all this anxiety of like, I'm wasting my time. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Right now, I'm on my way to Office Max to print out Andres' script, the screenplay, to read it, right? That's like another thing on my list, a totally great use of time. But I'm finding myself using all this energy, worrying, and it's like, okay, you know what? You didn't do it. You did this other stuff, and maybe, yeah, you were avoiding it because that's the hardest thing. But it's not like you were sitting around. So it's like, I really want to find a way in my practice, to stop using energy like this, because it's a total waste. And I do it a lot. Con permiso. Yeah, I mean, it's just like, what am I doing? What am I doing? And I think that, I have met people that don't have this problem, that had such insane faith in their vision. In the course of my life, I was semi-close with like one really famous writer, director, and one athlete, professional athlete. And these people are indelible, not just because of their abilities and talents, but just like they had this singularity of vision, this trust in themselves that was like so total. And I'll never forget that about them. And I knew that about them before they had reached the heights of success that they had. And I was so struck by that character trait, this like, something bordering on cocky, something bordering on like, I don't know, so special. And they never wasted energy on this bullshit. They didn't. They just didn't worry. They just acted and executed and moved on. They talk about that with athletes. Like, professional athletes have short memories. They miss a shot and they've already forgotten about it. It was kind of becoming a comprehensive introduction to my entire professional life. So it's like, you know what, let's go there. Another thing that happened this week, here, first things first, printed out that script of Andres, also printed out, you Americans know exactly what this is, a W-9 freelancer contract. So, when I'm not, perfecto, gracias, writing and selling masterpieces, I, like the rest of us, have to make bills, and part of the way I do that is by teaching. I'm really hoping to leverage this channel eventually into some kind of workshop. Maybe we can work together, build something, some writing classes. I do those, for example, this W-9 I printed out is for North Carolina School of the Arts. They have a podcast writing and pitching class. It's so loud here. It's a car wash and a major street. Anyway, so, the realistic behind the scenes, printing out W-9s because, hustle. That's what we're doing out here, doing our best. 5:57, Friday afternoon, and we are going to conclude this working week. What a week. Really proud of some of the things that were accomplished this week. Had this anxiety about not making the kind of progress on Bully I want, but hey, we're here. We're still here. We're not going anywhere. We'll be back next week. You made it this far. I appreciate you. And if you really want to know what I'm about, I have to recommend Samantha Schweblin. We talked about her short stories in this video. She wrote a novella called Fever Dream, which might be the scariest thing I've ever read. Put it on the list. If you're a parent, proceed with at your own risk. It is the kind of thing that, as a parent, got to me.